Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Tommy Thompson. He is an entrepreneur, executive coach, consultant, blogger, and avid golfer. Welcome to the show, Tommy.
Thank you so much, AJ. It's great to be with you and to be on your show.
You are welcome to the show, Tommy. You are welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure a lot of people, not just in India, but across the world, will benefit from what we are going to talk about. Will be understanding from experience of life. Will understand from you about navigating life's storm. So first, to understand from you, Tommy, tell us a bit about you, your journey in life, so that people know who is Tommy Thompson from Tommy himself.
Sure. I appreciate that. Well, I live in Richmond, Virginia, and in many ways, just an ordinary life. After college, I went to seminary and actually from seminary, began to enter into an entrepreneurial journey. Was married at the time, and my brother and I were in business together. And we were just kind of living the life. We had developed 4 different businesses that we were running. Life was going great in so many ways. I was involved in the 4 businesses, which involved some travel. I was teaching a large class at my church. We were beginning to have a family together, and so many things were going on. And as all of that began, it began to kind of pile up. And one of the businesses began to have a few difficulties during one of the recessions back in 1990. The pressure began to build up, and all of a sudden began to experience this time where I was doing so many good things, but yet I was drowning under doing all of this good. And so one of the first storms that I experienced in life was this just tremendous overload that was happening, not because I was doing anything bad, but because I was doing too many good things. And so I can remember one night sitting in bed, just with some of the stress of the business and managing so many things going on, and feeling like almost like the bed was spinning and that life was out of control. And I could feel for the first time in my life like I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and just wondering, how did life get to be this way, and wondering what was going to be the path out of this. And that was kind of the first beginnings of the lessons of navigating life's storms.
Right. I understand. But could you elaborate a bit? You said you were being nice, more nice, and that leads to, some sort of difficulties in life. How can people calibrate this being nice with the being nice to themselves versus being nice to others all the time? How do you calibrate? Nowadays, you have this word called self-care. Earlier, it was not. So what is your experience, your understanding? What would you like to tell, especially the young generation, about being nice, but also being nice to yourself?
Well, I think it's a question often of the quantity. I think in our culture, certainly here in the United States, we've been led down this path to believe if something's good, then more of it is better, and even more is even better and better. And so we begin to pile on so many things into our lives, so much noise and distraction, and good things, often taken care of and serving other people, even self-care things where we never stop the engine from going. And I feel like that unless we begin to learn to put some boundaries and to create some space in our lives, which I think is some of the best self-care that can happen, then we can be going on and all of a sudden feel like we're in a storm, that the seas are raging, and all the self-care in the world uh, won't really help if we don't learn that the best self-care is to create some space to breathe.
Absolutely, absolutely. One more thing I wanted to ask is nowadays, business partnership, other partnerships do not work for long. You managed to carry on with this business partnership with your brother for many, many years across many businesses. What
Yes.
would you what would you like to share in terms of knowledge, understanding, relationship about partnership to the present generation? People form companies with several founders, and then it flounders within a couple of years several times.
Yeah, no, that's great. So many people have asked the question of how in the world could you be in business with your brother for that long? I mean, I can hardly talk to my brother. And, I think one of the things that we uh, established and appreciated early on was our differences. And so my brother and I are very different. He's a big thinker, a visionary, loves to throw 50 things onto the plate at once, and then put that plate in front of me and say, okay, which one of the things should we do? And how do we go about doing it? And so I think early on, we began to look at our differences as complementary, as a benefit, as opposed to, he's wrong for throwing all these things on my plate. And so at the core, we appreciated the differences rather than allowing those differences to be a source of contention. And he's a phenomenal guy, but I so appreciate that he always appreciates the things that I bring to the table. So we know each other's strengths, we know our own weaknesses, and that allows us to work together. And of course, not always well. We've had to have some hard conversations, and that's also important in a partnership. But at the core, it comes to appreciate someone else's strengths that are different from your own.
Right, right, Tommy. Now let's look at life. Life is can be very good, and all of a sudden, you might get something in your life which is full of grief, full of difficulties. In your case, it was your daughter's illness. Tell us
Yes.
about that. How did you manage such things? How do people manage such things when it happens? How did you manage for yourself? Obviously, it is not easy. Then you have to, navigate through grief in life. What would you like to share to the people in today's time? When there is so much of problems in their mind, in their lives, and then something difficult comes in that adds to, so much difficulty in life. I want your wisdom in all these things.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. The journey that we went through was, at least in my mind, one of the most difficult journeys uh, that I can imagine. Certainly, it began in 2010 when I received a phone call from my wife, who was visiting my daughter at college. My daughter was a vibrant, young, healthy 20-year-old, and was having a little bit of back pain. And remember in the middle of just a meeting with my CFO at the company, and picked up the phone when I saw that it was my wife calling, and she said, "Your daughter, my daughter, Perrin has cancer." And it was as if the world stopped in one moment. And that's often, unfortunately, the way storms come. They come completely unexpected. We don't get this grand warning that, well, things are building up. It happens at once. And I'm so thankful for the lessons that I learned that I described a little bit earlier, when things got so busy in life. And I learned that one of the most important ingredients of life is creating plenty of space. Because when that happened with my daughter, we intuitively knew that we had a long, hard road ahead of us. It was a stage 4 cancer for which there was no cure. And so we were immediately thrown into caring for her, which included, having a kidney removed 2 weeks into it, radiation, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, 6.5-year journey. And had we not, my wife and I and our family, really practiced creating space to be able to absorb and to process the most difficult things, I don't honestly know whether we would have survived. And that creating space was, in a lot of ways, it was totally counterintuitive. When you're going through something so stressful, so many people want to just distract themselves, just get busy and get busy. And yet in our creating space, it allowed us to look at what was going on, to process the feelings, to acknowledge the stress that we were under, to create the self-care for us that was so necessary, because we had a long journey, 6.5 years that she had the cancer, and unfortunately 2016, but some glorious things happened during that 6.5 years. So during that stage, and then during the period, which continues to this day, of grief of having lost her, it's that space that I believe enabled us to not only navigate life's storms, but to grow in the midst of the storms. And I can sense in myself and in my family a depth that didn't exist before we went through that incredibly difficult stage of life. And I think at the core of it, it began with creating space to reflect, space to process, space to grow. And I think that's critical in all of life settings. It's critical in relationships, it's critical in business, and it's critical when the storms come, is that we have a rhythm to life that allows us to move forward.
Right, right, Tommy. You encourage others, towards good and towards God. I want to understand, how did you see God at that point in time? Where was God with, around at that point of time when you were facing all this?
That's such a good question, and it's a hard question. One that I've been asked before was, where was God in the midst of that? And to be honest, I believe God was crying right with me in the midst of it. I don't believe that that God was the author of that difficult stage. And so God was with me as he was with my daughter during that hard times. And while I believe that God at his very core is good, there are times and there are places that we can't see that good. There are difficulties and there's hardship and there's frankly evil in the world. And that's a reality we live with. I believe that God is really desiring to bring good into the world. And even in the worst of circumstances with my daughter's cancer and death, I've seen so much good that God has done. But there was a significant period where I couldn't see that. I had to trust that. I didn't feel any good from God. I didn't see any good from God. I had to trust for a good while in things that I believed deeply in my heart, but I couldn't see. And then I saw God's goodness in the rearview mirror.
Right, right. I totally understand, Tommy. So, how do people trust someone who they don't see but only trust? And when, in the most difficult of situations, you start losing that trust, how do you keep that trust? How do you keep that faith? What would you like to tell to a lot
Hmm.
of people who might be in their own difficult times at the moment?
Yeah, I think this is where faith comes in, is that at the core, there's a step into the unknown. There's a step to say that uh, I may not understand it, I may not even fully believe it, but I want to trust and believe that there's a good God that's out there. And I want to give my life to that trust. So that, often is a step into the unknown. Um, as to how you maintain that, in life's storms, I spent a lot of time journaling. I spent a lot of time in prayer. I read the Bible very constantly, which kept on reaffirming to me that God is good, that He's worth trusting, and so I would hold on to that. My wife used to use the phrase that we kept on rehearsing the goodness of God. We were rehearsing the goodness of God when we couldn't feel and we couldn't see the goodness of God. And then again, as time came around, we began to see his hand even in the very, very difficult uh, things of life. Her prognosis gave her a 5 to 10% chance of living 5 years. And she lived 6.5 years and was married in the midst of that 6.5 year battle with cancer. One of the most, probably the most glorious experience that I've ever had, of seeing her married and walking her down the aisle that day. So there was so much joy and goodness and beauty, even in the midst of all of the darkness. And so we did see God's hand, but it took that trust when we couldn't see.
Absolutely. Absolutely. God is everywhere. God is with everyone. But a lot of times, people see this uncertainty around them. The walking into the unknown. You have walked the distance of life to a lot of extent. What would you tell a lot of people, especially young people, seeing the way life is changing so quickly with artificial intelligence coming in, with lots of anxiety about present and the future? How would you want them, or like, tell them about looking at life and not being anxious about it?
Yeah, it's such a tough question because it's a balance. I'm fascinated by artificial intelligence, and I love technology, and I love learning new things and exploring new things. But there's so much quantity, it can get completely overwhelm you. And so I think for younger people, for older people, frankly, my friends and people around me, I think the core is to create the right foundations for your life. To create the right foundations of the principles of what matters to you, what you believe most deeply. And when those foundations are set, then when life gets crazy, when the storms come, or even when all of the good comes, you're not swayed, you're not overwhelmed, you're not um, pulled away by, frankly, distractions. Social media is a massive distraction. It has so much good to offer if it's in its right place. And I think that comes with saying, do you know who you are? Do you know what you believe? Are your values set? And if you can have that set, then your chances of navigating the craziness of our culture and world are so much better, rather than living life reactively.
Right, right, Tommy. There is much to learn from you about life, about navigating life's storm, and there is a lot of things people can learn from your podcast, Space for Life. Tell us a
Thank
bit about your podcast. It's a nice name. I like it. Tell us a bit about what people can learn from that.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. I'm having a blast doing the podcast. I'm having a blast having conversations and hearing people's stories like you're affording me the chance to do. And, at the core of this podcast, Space for Life, is the idea that we've been talking about is some of the best in life happens when we stop rushing, when we quiet down a bit and we're able to listen to one another and hear and relax for a moment. And some of the best, most important purpose comes when we slow down like that. And so, I think the guests that we have and the messages that I want to share is that the best of life comes with that core ingredient of creating space. The best in our relationships happen when we slow down and quiet down and give our full attention to the person right across from us. The best of our work comes when we slow down and think and strategize and plan. And really, that's the source of joy too. So, the podcast is people sharing their life stories and about how they create and find space and find God and find life. And it's a privilege to hear these stories, as I'm sure you feel, each week with this. It's as good as life gets.
Absolutely. As I said, there is much to learn from you, a lot much to understand from you. So, a lot of people who would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do so, Tommy?
Well, thank you. I'm on social media, even though I try to keep it at its right place, but I'm on social media, probably on Instagram the most. And my Instagram handle is author_Tommy Thompson, which is pretty easy. Wrote a book, Space to Breathe Again. But the easiest way probably is my website, which again is easy to remember. It's www.tommythompson.org.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much, AJ. Really enjoyed the time.